Never seen that before.
Hi everyone, so today we're going to make some cola. Now the final product was pretty close to what you might get at the store and what you might be expecting, but I'll let you be the judge. So you guys have probably all had some form of cola before, so I really don't need to introduce it. We can just go straight into the recipe.
Did he say cola?
Now the recipe can be broken down into three main parts. We first have a flavoring, which is called 7X, the cola flavoring. We need to prepare the other components that go into the soda syrup, and then we need to cook all this stuff together to actually make the syrup. So the first thing that we're gonna need to do is make the flavoring. And to do this, you can use all essential oils, which is what the original recipe calls for. But since I really didn't want to spend 40 euros on essential oils, I instead tried to make my own 7X flavor compound using the actual ingredients that make up the essential oils. And this was a little bit more work, but I mean, in the end, it worked the same. So we just need the following ingredients to actually make the flavoring. We need 10 grams of an orange peel. We need 10 grams of a lemon peel. We need 4 grams of cinnamon, which is about 1 stick. We need about 1 gram of nutmeg, 1 gram of coriander seeds, and lastly, 4 grams of neroli or bitter orange peel. But I really couldn't find these, so I did some research and found out that kaffir lime leaves are comprised of 80% of the same flavonoid compound, and so I used 4 grams of those instead. And the kind of funny thing you realize when you're making this is actually that cola is really just a citrusy lemon drink with some spices in it. Anyways, that's kind of weird. So now that we have our 7 ingredients that make up the quote-unquote 7X flavoring, we need to actually get the flavors out of these ingredients. And essentially you would do this by having some sort of essential oil, where you have a carrier oil that's holding the flavor compounds that make up these flavors. Now, there's plenty of ways to actually get these flavors out, or these essential oils out. You can use stuff like steam distillation, you can soak them in oil for about a month or so, but I was in a bind for time, so I wanted to attempt a shortcut, which was to pound them in a mortar and pestle, and then put them into a pot with about 75 milliliters or 5 tablespoons of coconut oil. This will act as a carrier oil, and basically we'll heat this up and strain out the coconut oil later, and hopefully all the flavors will come with it. So the next step is to take this pounded mixture and steep these ingredients in oil while heating it over low heat for about 30 minutes.
That was a smell like shit.
Put this pan on the stove, let it sit for about 30 minutes, and then pull it off. So after the 30 minutes were up, I strained off the coconut oil, and what we're left with is a super fragrant Coke flavored oil that has all of the flavor compounds from the ingredients that were simmering in it. So now we have a slight problem here, which is that the flavors are dissolved within this oil, and we want to use water for the rest of our cola. Now, as you know, water and oil repel each other, so how do we get these two to mix? Well, we can use an emulsifying agent. Now, we have two options here. One is, which is the method I'm going to use, is to use alcohol as the emulsifying agent. Now the amount of alcohol we'll use here is so minimal that it'll be virtually non-existent in the final Coke, but if you don't want to emulsify using alcohol, that's completely understandable. You can also use something called gum arabic, which is what's typically used in regular cola. It's apparently pretty easy to find online. Just make sure that you get food grade stuff and not stuff made for art. So I'm going to use the alcohol method, and for that I'm using 10 milliliters of alcohol, and I'm going to use the moonshine that I've made in a previous video because it's a semi-neutral flavor and it's mostly ethanol, which is what we're after. We can then add 3 tablespoons of our flavored oil, and then we need to whisk both the alcohol and oil together until they become very tiny dots, so tiny that you can't see them. It should also be stable and not separate again after a few seconds. Now once we have our emulsified mixture, we can move on to the next step, which is preparing the rest of our ingredients. So first off, we have our sugar. Now in retrospect, I would recommend about half the sugar here, but I'm not really a fan of the overly sweet colas that you find at the store. But if you are a fan of those kinds of sodas, you can use the originally called for amount, which is 600 grams. If you want it a little bit less sweet, you can add a little bit less. We'll also need another 100 grams to caramelize, and this will help with the color.
That's a lot!
We'll just separate this to the side. Next, we need 3.5 grams of citric acid. And lastly, we need 500 milliliters or about 1 lime's worth of lime juice. Now, the version I'm making will be caffeine free, but if you choose to add some caffeine, it would be good to prepare that right now as well. And lastly, we need 500 milliliters or about 2 cups worth of water. Okay, now that we've gathered all the ingredients, we can actually work on creating the cola syrup. Now here, we want to take those 100 grams that we've separated out for the caramelization.
This is a
we're going to simply pour this into a pan over medium-low heat and let the pan heat up. Now be sure to stir the sugar as it starts to melt. As it starts to melt, it will also start to turn brown, and this is exactly what we want. At the point where the sugar has completely melted and we have a nice brown color, we can go ahead and add in our 500 milliliters of water. Once we add the water, it will immediately seize up and crystallize, but don't worry. Just try to stir this mixture up, and eventually the caramel will begin to dissolve in the water again. And once it has, we can go ahead and add in the rest of our sugar. We can then add in the citric acid, and lastly the lime juice. Now, I've always heard that Coca-Cola without any food coloring would be green, and I didn't really believe it. But
Very
after
cool.
adding the lime juice, the whole syrup that I was making turned green actually, and you can see it here. To give it a little more of a realistic Coke color, I personally would be adding in some black food coloring that I have. But that part is completely optional and up to you. So once everything's
Dan's
mixed,
game,
we can
dude.
pull the syrup off the stove and let it cool down. I let mine cool down for a few hours, at which point it's time to make a soda. You simply need 2 tablespoons of syrup for about 12 ounces or about 330 milliliters of soda water. So you just pour the syrup in, then you pour the water in. But I also recommend to adjust the syrup ratio for your personal taste. Give it a good mix with a spoon, and then add a few ice cubes. And that's it. It tasted similar, but not quite the same as a regular Coke. In the future, I definitely will reduce the amount of sugar and play with the flavoring ratios a little bit more to try to make it a little closer to the
Dude, that's not even, I know I watched the whole thing, dude. That's disgusting, dude. What an insult to the real product it is. What an actual joke, dude.
Case is now closed, but Cardiff's own caped crusader is far from forgotten.
How to make Coke Bogu.
Angiosimus,
Joker.
far from forgotten.
What a joker.
Angiosimus, 7.
How to make
Anxious, dissatisfied, tired of waking up in that hotbed of mindless drudgery and tedium you've affectionately come to refer to as your life? Convinced that everyone else has their ducks in a row while you lurch from disaster to disaster like some rickety tandem Victorian velocipede?
Yep.
Caught in a perpetual cycle of feeling good, feeling medium, then returning to feeling like crap again, waiting for the day when you'll actually find yourself in a good mood for more than 5 minutes? Well, there is quite a good reason for some of that, and it begins, as we all did, with biology.
Too real
Nature
feels
uses
bad
2
man.
methods of making babies on our planet.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do. I'm gonna do this 80-minute video, dude. I'm not gonna watch that, dude. It's 18 minutes.
Boink
We'll see if it's
and
good
no
enough.
boink. No boink, or asexual reproduction, is generally used by bacteria, plants, and fungi, and it involves an
Any
organism
flickers?
copying its genetic material for the next generation. Boink, or sexual reproduction, usually involves a male and a female doing the nasty and combining their DNA
8
50-50
months,
to produce
pussy
offspring,
boy.
and that's the one we'll focus on here. Species change over time due to 2 main factors, selection and mutation. Selection means that organisms better suited to their environment have more chance of surviving and so reproducing. They will also often choose mating partners with what they consider attractive qualities or phenotypes. For example, often deer like big antlers, peahens like colourful plumage. The male bowerbird attempts to attract ladies in the form of a bachelor pad called a bower, which takes sometimes months to decorate. Stupid birds. Humans would never make such silly displays for mating purposes, would we?
Do?
The second trick is mutation. Mutation means that sometimes there are glitches in the DNA of offspring, and this could be due to copying errors or even cosmic rays. In humans, it can mean anything from red hair to genetic diseases. Sometimes these mutations will then be passed down to the next generation of offspring, and if they're beneficial for survival, will be sexually selected and even become a characteristic feature of the species. Through circumstances we still don't understand, humans have developed relatively large brains and outsmarted, nommed, or avoided every other species on the planet. Good old survival of the shittest. And while we pride ourselves on being fantastically clever, very little has actually changed in terms of hardware between prehistoric humans and modern humans, because evolution takes ages, as we know. Now, modern humans are sneaky, of course. We've taken the old evolutionary urges and drives and found ways to still enjoy them. Aggressive combat into competitive martial arts, for example, or a constant obsession with reproduction turned into an act you can do thousands of times across your lifespan and never actually make offspring. But evolution is not a smart or conscious process. Some things are not well designed. A narrow pelvis, for example, making childbirth a thoroughly enjoyable experience for women everywhere. Or standing up, which in return for a better line of sight and an ability to grab stuff, also kindly gave us sciatica and hemorrhoids in return. However, we've also inherited the mental traits evolution kindly gave to our ancestors.
Huge fucking brains!
Curiosity, speech, a low anxiety threshold, a bit of a tendency for pessimism, and a total inability to keep right on the London Underground escalators.
Read my
The
sub,
signs
you
are
dumb
fucking
cow.
everywhere. We are a contradictory mix of animal and mad god. But we may be, this century, on the threshold of gaining technologies to alter our evolutionary blueprint, courtesy of genetic engineering, going into our genome and ripping up the floorboards. So what shall we do then? make ourselves harder, better, faster, stronger, eyes on elbows, an ability to actually piss in a straight line first thing in the morning. All very interesting, but there is one particular evolutionary bad boy we might rewire
Hello,
that's so
xQc.
fundamental to the
This
human
is a
condition
really
we
deep
barely
and
even
meaning
notice it's
video,
there.
and it is also related to what are you watching. Just finished a 14-hour day at work.
Its
Thank
name
you for
is
providing me
misery.
laughs for most of that.
We are
Yeah,
not
finally
designed for
covered.
sustained happiness or
Whips be
optimism.
gone.
Natural
Are
selection
we
had
cozy,
very little
chat?
interest in our mental welfare. Survival was key. As a result, it seems most of us, regardless of geography or social standing, have a hedonic set point. That is, something good might happen and you'll feel good for a while, something bad might happen and you'll feel bad for a while, but eventually you will probably return to your baseline, which appears to be set out of your control, partly genetically. For some individuals, this set point is rather high. For
I
the
relate
rest
to
of
that
us,
a lot.
Back in the
Yeah,
jungle, I love
not
you
so
PVC
much.
xQc
And that's
L in
ignoring
the
all
chat.
the other pitfalls
Look
of
at this
Brain
Pepe
1.0, including age-related dementia, self-loathing, a tendency towards addiction, low boredom thresholds, and everything else we didn't ask for, genetically speaking.
Yes, yes,
These
yes,
nasties
yes,
have
yes.
haunted us for millennia, and they seem to form part of what we've lovingly come to know as the human condition, which for many of us is just shorthand for stuff we can't change and we're shit and it's natural and have a cup of tea and get on with it. But if we crack the ability to send these
Here's a
evolutionary
video for
dishes
you,
back to the
Thunder.
kitchen to engineer ourselves happier or more content, shall we fucking give it a whirl or not? After all, we've got such a great track record with limiting the few godlike powers we already have.
In Explorer?
If we do gain mastery over our own genetics, how far should we go with this one? And how the hell will we know when to stop? Now, luckily, genetic engineering is really simple, and there are no
God.
risks, and genetic engineering is really simple.
Chat, I want to laugh. This is just fucking long, dude. I don't want to watch it. 17 minutes.
You
Of
see,
pictures.
there's a single gene for everything. A cleverness gene, a tallness gene, a really good looking gene, and they can just be
What is
turned
our
on and off
baby's
without
name?
affecting anything else, and
Smile.
there being no bad consequences. And genetic engineering
like it, but-
is really simple. There's definitely no risk of making horrific alterations to the human genome that only become apparent generations later. There's no risk of nasty folks creating engineered drug-resistant pandemics that are virtually impossible to eradicate. There's certainly no risk of a group of us getting hold of the technology and creating an entirely separate genus of humans. We can't possibly...
Okay, I'm done. Chat, I'm Jebba's on Epics, dude. Chat, it is time to get cozy, boys. Chat, it is time to get cozy, boys and girls. Guys, dude, that was really long, dude. I feel bad, dude. Just being on stream, like I would do it. I just watch it on my fucking alt account.